Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, America. Good morning, Michigan. This is your host, Wayne Bradley, here live on the Wayne Bradley Show. And I want to welcome everybody back. I've been off the air for a while, and thank you again for listening in. Today we're going to really have a good time. We're going to listen to all the different Michigan senatorial candidates. I've talked to them all, and I want them to explain their vision on why they want to be the best choice of the Michigan GOP Senate candidate. So today, it's been an interesting month so far in this race. In the beginning, Pete Hoekstra, who is looking at right now being the front runner, he initially did not want to get into this race. Once he announced, a lot of people just assumed that he was going to be the only candidate in the race. Well, he was mistaken by that, and within a few weeks, Clark Durant entered the race, and that really tightened things up. Pete Hoekstra is still the front runner, but Clark Durant has also managed to raise a lot of money in a few weeks. And then you got Gary Glenn, who I think could be the X factor here, the person that could surprise a lot of people. He's got a lot of support with the grassroots people and the Tea Party organizations, and you have also Peter Kenichi and Randy Hegman. So it's going to be an interesting race. I think that all the candidates have something to offer. They're very good candidates, and in particular with Pete Hoekstra, Clark Durant, and Gary Glenn, I know them. I've had personal conversations with them, and I think they're all great candidates. It'll be interesting to see who the people of the state of Michigan support. I know so far, like I said, Pete Hoekstra has been leading the race when you look at polls and also at fundraising, but Clark Durant's done a real good job at fundraising, and like I said, Gary Glenn has a lot of the grassroots support. Peter Kenichi does also, and Randy Hegman has a very interesting platform for him as senator as well. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start playing the interviews that I've had with all the candidates, and we're going to listen to we're going to listen to Clark Durant's interview first. Like I said, he was the person that kind of surprised people. We knew there might be other candidates in the race, but he announced quickly after Pete Hoekstra announced. So what we'll do is we'll go into the Clark Durant interview first, and if you have any questions, give us a call today at 347-996-3175. The call-in number is 347-996-3175. Here's the interview with Clark Durant. Sorry about that. We're having a little technical difficulties. Haven't been on the air for a while, so forgive me. Like I said, Clark Durant was the person, like I said, that kind of snuck in on the race. He's got a lot of support from the education community. Clark Durant is the CEO of Cornerstone Schools, so I mean he has a wealth of experience. Someone like myself which education is very important. He has a lot to offer. And like I said, we're going to go into the interview right now with Clark Durant. And listen in. If you have any questions, the call-in number is 347-996-3175. And we're back on the Wayne Bradley Show live from Mackinac Island. I've got another great senatorial candidate here, Clark Durant, and we're going to talk to him about his platform and his ideas on how we can improve America and get things back on track. Welcome to the show, Clark.
Wayne, it's a real honor and a pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for asking me.
Thank you. Now, for the people that are listening, they might not be familiar with you. Can you give people a little background information about yourself and what made you decide to run for Senate?
Well, for the last 40 years, I've been involved in trying to help people and to solve problems. I'm probably most known for being the founder of the Cornerstone Schools in Detroit 20 years ago, and these schools have given children a tremendous opportunity to be successful. They've also been an example that all children can learn. Oftentimes, urban kids, for example, get written off because of different social issues or whatever they may be. Cornerstone is an example that all kids can learn, all kids learn differently, but all kids can do well. I was also headed up an agency for President Reagan. I reorganized a railroad for Elizabeth Dole. I was president of the State Board of Education. 40 years ago, I started the Center for Constructive Alternatives and a little publication, now a large publication called Imprimis, that goes to 2 million people around the world. I went to law school at Notre Dame. When I came back to Detroit, I spent almost the first 6 years of my life doing nothing but representing people who could not afford a lawyer. They were people who, frankly, who were voiceless in a system that oftentimes didn't listen to them, and I just wanted to give them a fair shake. In a curious way, I find myself now wanting to be the advocate for another group of voiceless people, and those are the taxpayers. Those are the job creators, the men and women who are out there trying to make a living, and they ought to be able to keep more of what they earn. They ought to be able to not be so heavily regulated or to have this enormous debt and spending burden that Congress has put on them. So I've had Susan and I have been married for 38 years. We have 4 wonderful children, 2 of whom are married, and we have 2 grandchildren.
Excellent. Now, what made you really decide when you were looking at this senatorial race? I mean, first of all, how do you feel about the way that the party and I guess some of the establishment people have pretty much tried to pick their candidate before things have really got started here?
Well, I decided to run because for 2 reasons. I love my country. This is a great country. It's not a perfect country, but it is a great country. And I tremble for my country. The career politicians have overspent, and not only in spending, but the debt levels are beyond any kind of level of responsibility. And that has to change. And I've seen, and it doesn't bother me that the establishment has gathered around Congressman Pete Hoekstra, who had served in Congress for 18 years, because all of a sudden it's all part of the buddy system. Well, the buddy system has gotten us in trouble. And I'm not a go-along, get-along kind of guy. I'm trying to understand a set of circumstances. I try to identify issues and solve problems, and to solve them in the context that freedom works, the American way of trusting people to have more control over their own lives, to allow them to save, to spend, and to invest, and to build their families, to build their businesses, and to create opportunities. That's the way Clark Durant wants to be about. But the Washington way of these career politicians has mired us in debt. That is, as I say, what puts us on the verge of an economic collapse. And whether it's Republicans or Democrats, that's unacceptable. And people have to rise up and say enough's enough. If I may offer an historical analogy, the election of 1860 was framed very clearly by Abraham Lincoln. Either we will be a nation that is half free and half slave, or we will have to choose one or the other. Ultimately, after paying a great price, our country said that we must be all free. And the Republican Party grew out of that experience. The Whigs, on the other hand, because they were not willing to embrace freedom, disappeared. Well, I see the same choice being faced here in a different way. The question of debt and spending will enslave this generation and generations to come, and we have the same question. Are we going to live in a debt-filled life that will enslave us, or will we be for freedom in the American way, which is to have less taxes, less spending, less government, and more freedom, and trusting people to have more control over their own lives?
Okay. Now, if elected to Senate, what would be one of the first things that you would tackle? What do you think needs fixing the most as far as our debt, and what areas can they, obviously have to cut things to get things to where we need to be?
I would say that the number one thing is economic growth.
Okay.
We need to take things that will bring about economic growth in the private sector. Only the private sector can create jobs that last and that are sustainable. And if they aren't, then it's only a small few who end up paying the price for a mistake. When you have these government jobs, then all the taxpayers suffer from their failure, and governments can't pick winners and losers. So everything that can bring about economic growth, and here are 2 or 3 things that can do that. We need a simpler, fairer, flatter, more competitive tax return. You should be able to fill your taxes out on a postcard at a low rate across the board for everybody, and then get about the business of doing your business, of creating value for others. So reforming the tax code. The second thing is we need to repeal the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act. Now, that's normally referred to as Obamacare, but I say the full name because this, like typical of Washington, they say one thing and do another. This act is neither about patient protection or care that's affordable. So anytime Washington labels something, assume the opposite. But the regulatory burden on small businesses is enormous. The undermining of our health care will be enormous, and I don't think the American people should be mandated to buy anything. And this act does, and this law does that. The second thing I would repeal is the Wall Street Reform Consumer Protection Act, otherwise known as Dodd-Frank. It neither reforms Wall Street nor protects consumers. In point of fact, it makes it more expensive to do business. It protects companies that are deemed by the Treasury Department too big to fail, and that only prolongs the problem. So I would repeal both of those. I would move to repeal both of those acts. The other thing I would do is I think young people under the age of 21 or up to the age of 21, if they're willing to work, say, up to 30 hours a week, I don't think they should pay taxes at all on income. I also think that the employers who hire them for those kids shouldn't pay taxes either, so that these kids can be hired, not taxes for hiring those kids. If these kids are hired, then they're hired to learn, to create value, but also to learn the habits of the good workplace. That you have to show up on time, you have to do good work, you have to listen to others, you have to be a part of a team. Well, let's get our young people hired and into the workforce so that they will develop the habits of a lifetime about what it means to be either a good employee or a good employer.
Excellent. Now, you obviously with the education background, I've heard a lot of the Republican candidates talking about abolishing the Department of Education. How do you feel about that, and do you think that's actually a necessary step right now in this, what we consider a global economy, and challenging kids from other countries that cultures take education a lot more seriously than we do here in America?
Well, I think there's the simple answer in education is enunciating a very simple principle. A parent's first responsibility is the education of their children. A child's first teacher is their parent. For good or for ill, a parent is a child's first teacher. So that principle has to be enshrined. The government, the federal government, cannot be making determinations about local education and how we educate our children. But I think that this is more than about abolishing whatever the Department of Education, because what the real fight has to be about is we have a monopoly politicized system across the United States, even in our local communities. I would rather focus on asking the questions, why are we allowing systems to develop that are favor and are for the benefit of a few and don't have the kids as the first barometer of success, despite what the language is, because all of the indexes, all of the tests suggest that our children are not being prepared the way they should be prepared. If we could think differently about how education is delivered in America to help kids to be competitive, that's a fight worth having. Fighting over whether the Department of Education should exist or not, we don't want the Department of Education to be involved in any of the local education kinds of day-to-day kinds of things of schooling. But the point is, the real fight has to be throughout our whole country. We have this politicized monopoly system that is not delivering the excellence that has to be there. We should be asking questions about how do we change that system rather than focusing on all of the political capital that will be involved in having to do something about the Department of Education. Just get the Department of Education out of local education, but focus on asking the fundamental questions about how do we think differently of delivering a quality public education.
I think that's probably the best answer I've heard from any Republican candidate at any level about what to do with education, because honestly I've been a little disappointed with some of those answers. What do you think about all the military activities we're involved in right now, and how does that affect our fiscal bottom line, and what would you do differently?
Well, I think first of all we have to recognize that our men and women who serve in uniform, these are the real American heroes. I know we celebrate our athletes and all the rest of that, but our real American heroes are the men and women who serve in uniform, because they are putting their lives on the line every day. I think the second thing is, America has always been a beacon of hope in the world. We have always been a symbol to others of freedom and freedom for other people. But America has also been a country that has to be cautious about where it deploys its troops. And we can't fight every war. We can't fight every battle. We have to pick and choose these very carefully. I think that in Iraq, for example, it is important. We've invested an enormous amount of resources of time and material, and most of all, human life. And we need to try to work with the Iraqi people to allow them to transition to where they can take care of themselves and defend themselves. I don't know whether we're fully at that point yet. In fact, I don't think we are. So I think there is a role that has to be played. In Afghanistan, that's a little bit different question. It doesn't seem as if we're as welcome in Afghanistan, and if we're not welcome there, then we shouldn't be there. And I think that's.
What about the situation in Libya? What about that? How does that? I mean, that's, to me, that was a war that we probably didn't need to jump into. How do we deal?
Well, you have an interesting situation there, because you had a situation where you had the rebels wanting to take on Muammar Gaddafi. I think there is a role where you can provide munitions and logistical support and this sort of thing. But I think unless there's a very clear, defined military purpose, I think Colin Powell had it right, with a strategy to win and to clearly win, then I think we have to be reluctant to commit troops to it. To hide behind NATO I believe, is not the way to go. I think having NATO as an alliance is fine, but America is the leader of the free world at the moment, and I think America has to act like a leader.
Now, I've heard also a lot of, on the national and the state level, a lot of candidates have been really pushing for right to work laws here. Where do you stand on right to work, and is that something that you would support?
Well, I support freedom to work for all people. Now, I also support that if somebody wants to, join together and form a contract, if you will, have a union, so to speak, that's a part of the freedom to work. But I don't believe in forcing people to have to pay dues to keep a job. That's not right. That is not right. And so I'm for freedom to work. I think it's the right thing. Our country is about freedom, and people can form a union of their own, but I don't believe you can force people to do things that, and certainly to pay money to keep a job. I don't think that's right.
Well, if people want to know more about your campaign and know more about you, what's the website and what information can you give?
Well, Wayne, why don't we give them your home phone number? And barring that, I would suggest that they go to www.clarkdurant.com. Clark Durant, C-L-A-R-K, Durant, D-U-R-A-N-T.com, all one word. And I look forward to any questions that may come from your viewers. Just help them. I just ask that your viewers identify themselves when they do it, so I'll know where it came from.
Thank you so much for coming on today to the show, and good luck on your campaign.
And thanks for what you do, Wayne. I think an important part of the American idea is to get ideas out there and to have a conversation. And technology allows us to do this, even on the porch of the Mackinac, at the Grand Hotel on Mackinac. But you've been doing this for a long time, and thank you for your work in getting the word out and getting good ideas discussed.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks. God bless you and all your listeners.
God bless you, too.
Well, that was Clark Durant. Like I said, it was a very interesting interview with him. Like I said, he has the background that I'm looking for as far as education. I think is important, and I think that we need to pay attention to who actually, as far as this Michigan Senate race, who's going to be able to pull votes out of places like Detroit. And I think with his urban agenda as far as education and being involved in Cornerstone schools, I think that does bring something to look at. He has a lot of strong ties in the Detroit business community. So, like I said, each candidate has their own strengths. My next candidate, who I'm sure everyone's familiar with, is the former congressman here in the state of Michigan, Pete Hoekstra. He's enjoying right now what I would consider a comfortable lead in polls. You can't always read everything into polls, but he's enjoying a very comfortable lead in polls, and he's doing a decent job of fundraising. And fundraising hasn't always been his strong suit. So for him to be doing a good job like that, he's running a strong campaign. And I guess it'll be an interesting race here. So my next guest is the former Congressman, Pete Hoekstra.
We're back here live from Mackinac with I would consider the front runner in the Michigan Republican Senate race, Pete Hoekstra. Welcome back to the show, Pete.
Hey, it's good to be with you. Thank you.
Great. Now, the people listening, a lot of people are familiar with you. Can you give a little bit of background and what made you obviously decide to run for Senate?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, I've got private sector experience. I've spent 15 years working at Herman Miller. I've got congressional experience. I had the opportunity to serve in the House of Representatives. I left there in 2010. The reason we got into the 2012 Senate race is the direction that President Obama, Debbie Stabenow are taking this country. It's not working. It's causing, I think, a tremendous amount of damage and harm to this country. We need to move in another direction, and I think, along with a lot of other people, they thought that I was the best candidate to bring about the kind of change that we need.
Now, that's something I haven't quite seen ever before. You've got an amazing amount of support from the party. How does that feel this time around?
Well, it's very, very gratifying. But at the end of the day, whether it's Governor Rick Snyder who's endorsed me or whatever, every vote is the same. Everybody gets one vote. And so the thing that I think we're most excited about is we've got 1,000 grassroots people across the state who have signed on with the campaign. So it gives me a tremendous amount of confidence as we move forward, but we recognize that we've got to go out and earn that vote each and every day for the primary and for the general election, and that's exactly what we intend to do.
Okay. Now, I've talked to some of the other candidates, and they tried to paint you as a D.C. insider kind of thing. What do you have to say to those kind of detractions, and how would you address that?
Well, I'm not sure what else they would say. I mean, they've got to find some line of attack. The good thing is there's no substance to it. I fought Bill Clinton with John Kasich. It's why the governor of Ohio, John Kasich, he's endorsed me. I was in the foxhole with John in 1995 and 1996 when we fought the budget battles with Bill Clinton, and we won, and we balanced the budget. I fought the battle against No Child Left Behind. I was one of the lonely few Republicans who fought that battle. And then on national security, I mean, I was chairman of the Intelligence Committee for 6 years, and we went after intelligence reform, but more importantly, we went after the people that were wanting to attack the United States. We defeated them. I'm not, there are times where you agreed with the Washington establishment. There were times where you fought the Washington establishment. This is all about, each and every issue and what you're going to get done on those issues. And I'm more than willing to put my record up for fighting for the people of Michigan versus any one of these other folks.
Now, what would be the first thing, if elected to Senate, what would be one of the first things you would tackle? What would be the issue, the number one issue that you would think that you need to tackle once elected? Well,
obviously, you need to start going after jobs. You got to go start changing the policies that for years now under the Obama administration has been hurting our economy and hurting the jobs environment all across the country. So you need a better tax code. You need to reduce rules and regulations. You need to streamline, cut federal spending. You need to get rid of Obamacare. And the other thing that's hot on the agenda for a lot of folks, and myself included, is you need to control illegal immigration.
Okay. Now, what do you suggest? I mean, I haven't heard a lot of great suggestions. What do you think we need to do to improve the illegal immigration situation? What would be the thing that's getting in the way of that?
Well, you got to do two things. Number one, you've got to secure the borders. Now, that's not the whole immigration problem. has been missing so much from this debate. Half the people that are in this country illegally, they came here legally and they just overstayed their visas. That has nothing to do with border control. This means that you've got to put in place a system that takes away the incentive for these people to stay in the United States. The most effective way to do that is to do E-Verify, is put in place a very, very easy system for an employer to track whether an individual is in the country legally or not. And if they are not in the country legally, they can't work. And if an employer hires an illegal person after they've checked them out and they've identified that this person is illegal, but they hire him anyway, I'm sorry, then they're also then involved in breaking the law, and they've got to be fined and penalized.
In terms of the job situation, obviously here in Michigan, is right to work, is that something that you would support, or do you think that that's a good idea at this point?
Well, I think there's a lot of other issues. I mean, right to work, we've talked about it at the federal level before, but the bottom line is, it's never ripened. It's never gotten to the point where, in the time that I was in Washington, that anybody was even willing to I don't know that whether there's been hearings on it, but for sure there's never been any votes on it. At the same time, we got to take a look at the issues that are percolating right now, what the National Labor Relations Board is doing against Boeing, project labor agreements, prevailing wage. These are the kinds of fights that I've fought in Washington. These are the ones that we've got to fight and win right now before you start going after some of these other issues. Right to work is the right and the appropriate direction to go at the appropriate time.
What about education? I know that you've always been someone that's big on education. I've heard a lot of Republican candidates talking about abolishing the Department of Education. Is that something right now that we need to be focusing on?
We need to be focused on making sure that our kids get a great education, and right now we're falling short. The level and the quality of learning that our kids are going through, it's deteriorating each and every year. How do we improve that? We need to restore local control back into the process. We need to, we need to get the federal government out of this. Let's empower parents, local communities, and the state. If at the end of that process there's not much room or need for the Department of Education, so be it. You don't go in and say we're going to, the objective is get rid of the Department of Education. The objective is to get our kids a quality education.
Okay. And I guess one last question is, obviously you have a lot of experience dealing with the foreign relations. What do you think we're doing right now? The attack in Libya, was that a smart move? And what do we need to do, obviously, to get better on financial grounds? We're spending a lot of money with military action.
Well, the thing is, number one, the threats are real. Okay? But the threat wasn't Libya. The threat wasn't Egypt. The president is throwing our friends under the bus in a lot of these different countries. That makes us more vulnerable. I think the Muslim Brotherhood is going to be in charge, potentially in Egypt one of these days. That means the end result is it creates an environment for the extremists, the people who want to attack us. You're going to see these same kinds of things potentially happen in Libya. The president has a misguided foreign policy, and I don't think that there's anybody who really can understand exactly what his foreign policy is.
Okay. And for people who want to know more about your campaign, what's the website address that they can go to find out more information about your campaign?
They can go to HoekstraForSenate.com.
Well, thank you, Pete, so much. Good luck on the campaign trail, and we'll follow up and hopefully come back on the show soon.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
All right.
All right, and that was Pete Hoekstra, who came on, who's, like I said, the front runner right now for the Michigan Senate race. My next guest, someone who I consider a friend, someone who was really changing the possible dynamics of this race, is the president of the American Family Association here in Michigan, Gary Glenn. He is fired up as usual on this interview. He was really letting people know that there is some differences out here in the candidates, and I think he's really doing his best to difference himself from the other what you would consider party candidates. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and play the Gary Glenn interview. Strap on, because it gets a little wild on this one. Gary Glenn is on the air.
Well, we're here at the Mackinac Conference, and this is on the Wayne Bradley Show. I've got the next Senate candidate here for the state of Michigan, someone I would consider a friend and someone who's definitely shaking things up here in the state of Michigan. Has a history of doing that. Gary Glenn, welcome to the show.
Wayne, thank you, man. Great to be on with you again.
All right. Now, Gary, we have a lot of candidates in this race. For the people listening that might not be familiar with you, can you give a little bit of your background on what you've done?
You bet. And anything your listeners don't get answered listening to us today, they can go to my website at GaryGlenn.us. That's my name, so it's easy for me to remember. GaryGlenn.us. Just remember I'm running for the U.S. Senate. Remember to put that U.S. on the end instead of a comma or a net. But for the last 12 years, Wayne, as you know, I've been president of the American Family Association of Michigan. We stand up for Judeo-Christian values in the public policy arena in Lansing and elsewhere. Probably most prominent in that 12 years, I was one of the two guys that wrote the Marriage Protection Amendment that was on the ballot in 2004. Got 60% of the vote all across Michigan, won majorities in Detroit and Flint and Saginaw, saying simply that by constitutional definition in Michigan, marriage is between one man and one woman. That's a matter of common sense. It's the way God ordained it. It's clearly what's best for children. And the people of Michigan agreed overwhelmingly. I was a county commissioner in the 90s. I authored the first medical savings account health care plan for county employees anywhere in the country. Was asked to testify before Congress, and one congressional staffer called me a national pioneer in free market health care reform. So they might want to use it as a model for federal government health care reform. And if they had, we'd sure be a better off place right now than we are under Obama's socialized medicine scheme. But clearly that's an issue on which I strongly disagree with socializing our American health care system. And also in the 80s, I ran the campaign that made Idaho a right-to-work state that simply gave people the freedom to choose whether to join or financially support a union, and they could choose either way, to do so, not to do so, and they wouldn't have to face job discrimination or threat of losing their jobs, regardless of which decision they made. And I think you know, and you were at one of the founding meetings as well, I'm a founding member of the Michigan Freedom to Work Coalition, which is going to be pushing for passage of a right-to-work law here in Michigan. And if I'm a United States Senator, I'm going to champion that same issue in the United States Senate, because I think every American ought to be free to choose on that question and not have to face loss of job if they choose yes or no. It ought to be a simple freedom for all Americans.
Okay. Now, some people would kind of interpret that as being obviously anti-union. Can you explain to people listening out here so they understand exactly what you're fighting for and the freedom for the workers?
Well, see, and I think that is a ridiculous characterization. And I would use as an example, the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, Wayne, guarantees us the freedom to choose the church of our choice or no church at all. Right. Does anybody dare characterize the First Amendment as anti-religion or church busting because it gives us the freedom to choose? Of course not. And in the same way, a right-to-work law protects an individual employee's freedom to join a union, to financially support a union if they want to. But it also says the other side of the coin is covered. You can be free to choose not to join or financially support a union, and you don't have to worry about losing your job either way. And in Michigan today, it's perfectly legal. You choose not to give money to a union, even if they support things you morally object to, they can legally have you fired. That's job discrimination, pure and simple. It ought to be illegal.
Okay. Is there any difference, and I guess this is one of the last questions I ask about the right to work, is there any difference between the idea of telling them that they just can't use the dues or anything toward but negotiating, or the option of, like you said, paying or not paying? What would be the difference, and how does that work?
You bet. I don't think any individual should be forced as a condition of keeping their jobs to give 1 red cent to any private organization, even the most benevolent organization, a church or a charity. People shouldn't be forced to give them money. I'm president of the American Family Association of Michigan. We survive only if people voluntarily decide to be financially supportive of our activities. So, you know, if compulsory unionism, Wayne, didn't exist, and some group stepped up and said, well, we think our group is so good, we ought to be able to have people fired from their jobs if they don't give us money, even if we do things they don't agree with, we'd laugh them out of the public policy arena. And I think that's what we ought to do with compulsory unionism. A good example to tie two of the issues I've mentioned together, when the marriage amendment was on the ballot, the polls said that 2/3 of all union households in Michigan voted for it. But the MEA and Michigan AFL-CIO officials campaigned against it. So you had 2/3 of union households in this state who, because they're Christian or otherwise, who knows what their motivation was, voted in favor of the amendment to say that marriage would remain between a man and a woman, and yet under threat of being fired legally, they were forced to give money to an organization that campaigned against that amendment. I don't think any Michigan citizen ought to be forced to give money to any group that's a private organization, and especially one that spends their money or any other money promoting causes and candidates that individual doesn't support.
Now let's talk a little bit more about the Senate campaign.
Yes, sir.
Now, what I have been observing to this point has been seems like a lot of favoritism going on. Can you kind of difference yourself and let the listeners know what the difference is between you and the other candidates on the tree?
Little favoritism, Wayne? You think so?
I'm trying to be nice.
Yeah, well, the celebrity names of the Republican Party have anointed Pete Hoekstra as our supposed heir apparent nominee. I'm not finding that anointment to be carrying a whole lot of weight at the grassroots level of the party or with the Tea Parties especially. We've talked quite a bit about right to work. According to polls, 82% of Republicans in Michigan favor making Michigan a right to work state. I ran the campaign that passed right to work in Idaho 25 years ago. And that's an issue that clearly distinguishes me, for example, from the big name in the primary, Pete Hoekstra. Pete Hoekstra, for the 20 years he was in Congress, was endorsed and funded by Jimmy Hoffa and the Teamsters Union. One magazine called Pete Hoekstra Jimmy Hoffa's greatest booster. Pete Hoekstra has a record of opposing both state and federal right-to-work laws. In fact, Jimmy Hoffa told ABC News, because of our relationship with Pete Hoekstra, he will not support national right-to-work legislation. And when he was running for governor in 2010, Pete was the only Republican candidate for governor who said he did not believe Michigan should become a right-to-work state. And he wasn't just satisfied to, be in the pockets of Jimmy Hoffa and oppose any expansion of worker freedom. He actually co-sponsored a bill in 2007 with Debbie Stabenow and with Senator Barack Obama that would, by federal mandate, have forced every state, city, county, village, and township in America that had at least 5,000 population to unionize all their police officers, firefighters, and paramedics. One of the worst places you could have the federal government mandate unionization. Local government employees who already, many situations, you have AFSCME and Teamster and SEIU union officials having devastating impact and control over local government spending and budgets and driving some localities into bankruptcy. And Pete Hoekstra wants to federally mandate that every community in America of a certain size has to be forced to unionize all its public safety workers. And in addition to that, politically, it would funnel hundreds of millions of more dollars into the pockets of the SEIU and AFSCME and the Teamsters. I mean, that's not a vote, that's not a record I trust to represent Republicans in the United States Senate or the people of Michigan, because the polls indicate the people of Michigan by about a 20-point margin favor making sure every employee in our state is free to choose by passing a right-to-work law. So that's one good example. I can quickly mention some others. Pete Hoekstra voted for the $850 billion Wall Street bailout. He voted multiple times to raise the debt ceiling, the last time to $11 trillion. Voted for earmarks like the $223 million bridge to nowhere in Alaska. We'd spend $223 million to build a bridge to an island that had 50 people living on it. Voted for that. Voted for the Brady Bill extension, the gun control law, as I've already mentioned, against right to work and in favor of forcing every community in America to unionize its public safety workers. When Tea Party and conservative activists learn about that record, they're mad. They're going to abandon his campaign. And if he was the nominee, they might vote for him to prevent Debbie Stabenow from being reelected. But with that kind of record, they're not going to knock on doors. They're not going to make phone calls, pound yard signs, work their heart out for somebody who has, on some of these key issues, has voted the same way Debbie Stabenow did. And I'd wrap up that point by observing that Albert Einstein said the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again but expect a different result. So if we keep sending the same people back to Washington, Debbie Stabenow, 14 years in Congress, Pete Hoekstra, 18 years in Congress, both of whom voted for the budget and bailout and debt ceiling votes that got us in the mess we are now, is it rational to think, if we keep sending the same people back, Republican or Democrat, that the fiscal insanity in Washington will end? That we'll get a different result? I don't think it's rational, Wayne.
You make a very good point. Why do you think that it's just been, like you said, been anointed by the party? What do you think the reasoning is behind that?
Well, I think they're still operating under the old, system of politics, where if you've been in Washington for nearly 20 years, that makes you qualified to go represent the people. I mean, these days, I think Tea Party and conservative activists at the grassroots level, you tell them you were in Washington, they immediately don't trust you. That's not a good thing.
Right.
And that's why we shouldn't have the choice next November between a politician who's been there for 14 years and one who was there for 18 years. I think we need some new blood, somebody committed to restoring constitutional principles and voting that way consistent in the United States Senate and maintaining the moral values on which this country was founded. Those are the things I'm committed to. If I'm in the Senate, I'll vote consistent with that. I won't preach a conservative message here in Mackinac Island or other places in Michigan. Go back to Washington and vote just like Debbie Stabenow did.
What do you think? I've heard a lot of the presidential candidates speak on abolishing the Department of Education. Are you for that?
Yes. And how old are you, Wayne?
35.
All right, you're 35, Wayne. I'm 53. I graduated from high school in 1976. I think I turned out okay. Went on, was able to get a college education. Somehow, Wayne, I made it through high school, and there was no Department of Education. Didn't come around until 77 or 78 as a political payoff from Jimmy Carter because NEA union officials had made him the first presidential candidate they'd ever endorsed, got him the nomination, got him into the White House. He creates this new federal bureaucracy as a political payoff to the NEA. I got along fine. Tens of millions of Americans made it through, got a good education over the course of the history of our country without the federal government having a cabinet-level position. The very notion that we ought to be forced to give the federal government money from here in Michigan, ship it off to Washington to pay some bureaucrat at the Department of Education to turn around and issue dictates to local school boards and parents and principals about how we ought to educate our children here in Michigan is outrageous. We don't need it. I think the education of our children is in good hands with local school boards, with whatever regulation, if any, necessary at Lansing. We don't need federal bureaucrats in Washington dictating anything. It ought to just be eliminated. Let's save hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And that would apply to the Department of Energy and the National Labor Relations Board, to the Federal Reserve, to a lot of the funding we put into the United Nations. I mean, there are any number of things that I think that this country would not only be just fine without, we'd be much better without spending hundreds of billions of dollars on them.
Okay. And what do you, as far as all the military action we've gotten ourselves into over the last few years now, obviously we were in a few wars before the president came, but he's actually started new wars. What do you think we need to do to either remove ourselves from these situations, or what do we do to fiscally save ourselves from these kind of military action?
Wayne, my dad was a Marine who fought in the Pacific in World War II. In fact, he was at Pearl Harbor when it was attacked. Now, I mentioned that because it was December 7th, 1941. The last time, Wayne, this country officially declared war by Congress was December 8th, 1941. The Constitution says we're not supposed to go to war except by declaration of war by Congress, and we haven't done that since 1941 when we were attacked by the Japanese at Pearl Harbor. We were attacked in 2001, not by Japanese but by Islamic jihadists who were operating out of bases in Afghanistan. I think it was entirely legitimate for us to go in and take out those bases in Afghanistan, send our young, well-able, physically able, trained and equipped men over to fight them over there so that we don't have to fight them in the streets of Detroit. Innocent men, women, and children who aren't trained, who aren't young, have to worry about fighting them in the streets of Detroit. So I thought that was justified. But on the other end of the scale, Libya? I mean, if the only standard for applying American military force is that some dictator is violating the human rights of his country's citizenry, then why aren't we bombing China? Why aren't we bombing every other dictatorship? Plenty is doing in Africa. So it seems like we pick and choose. We pick on the ones we can pick on, and they don't pose a real threat, but there's no principle involved. They're spending our money. Every one of those missiles costs over $1 million to shoot those things. As I think President Bush said one time, President Clinton shot one and hit a camel in the rear end in a tent or something like that with no effect. So if our national security is at risk, then we ought to act. I don't think we need to be trying to be the policeman of the world. And if we follow the Constitution, we're not supposed to do any of this stuff without the Congress declaring war. If I'd been a senator, I'd have voted in favor of a declaration of war on the Taliban government of Afghanistan. Certainly would not have supported going in, spending money involved in an internal conflict in Libya, for example.
Okay, all right. Now, people want to learn more about you. What's the website that they should go to get some information from you?
Website for my campaign, Wayne, is GaryGlenn.us, GaryGlenn.us, GaryGlenn.us.
Right.
Privileged to be with you one more time, Wayne.
Well, I hope to have you on the show again during the campaign season. Good luck, and God bless you, Gary.
Hey, God bless you. And if I'm a United States Senator, Wayne, I'll come on your show then, too.
All right. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, man.
Well, that was Gary Glenn, the human flamethrower. He was, like I said, he comes from a strong history of fighting for conservative values. I do think that he's the one guy, if you had to pick one, that you don't have to worry about wavering on any issues. Gary Glenn is probably that guy. He lets you know where he stands from day one, and there's no sugarcoating that. Like I said, it's going to be very interesting to see how all this works during the campaign season. I do think he is what you would consider maybe the people's choice amongst grassroots organizations and Tea parties. But like I said, Pete Hoekstra's been on, campaigning hard with the Tea parties. He was just up in the UP for the last few days. Gary Glenn's got a big event this Thursday at Birch Run where Mike Huckabee will be here to endorse him. So they're all running good campaigns. My next guest is Peter Kenichi. I consider him the constitutionalist conservative out of all the candidates. His platform is truly something that's being run strictly off the Constitution. Not to say that any of the other gentlemen aren't, but that's truly his platform. So we're going to go ahead and go to Peter Kenichi and listen to his interview.
And we're here on the Wayne Bradley Show today, and thank you for everyone that's listening in today. We have a guest, one of the senatorial candidates here from Michigan, Peter Kenichi. Welcome to the show, Pete.
Thanks, Wayne. Glad to be here.
All right. For everyone that's listening to the show tonight, they might not be familiar with you. Can you give people a little background on yourself and what made you decide to run for Senate?
Well, first of all, I've never been in politics before. This is my first foray. A lot of people say, why am I jumping into a Senate race rather than a state or local race? I tell them the problems are at the federal level. Our state and local government, they're being well taken care of by the new leadership that we have. But at the federal level, they're actually destroying our nation. And I can't sit by anymore and just watch our nation be destroyed. But a little bit about myself. I did graduate from Michigan State with a degree in accounting. I've been in business for the last 35 years, providing time billing and accounting software to lawyers. And now I'm just extremely worried about the direction of our country, and I know that if we don't turn it around and actually limit it to its constitutional duties, that we're not going to exist as a free nation anymore.
Okay. Now, I want you to kind of expound on that a little bit because there are some differences we have some great candidates, obviously, on the Michigan GOP side. Can you give me your vision and what makes you different from the other candidates and expound a little bit more on what you believe are the constitutional duties of this country?
Well, I know that the greatness of this country is due to the limited nature of the federal government. Our founders threw off Britain, which was a tyrannical government imposing its will on the people. And the greatness of our revolution is that the founding fathers imposed a limited government through the Constitution that limited government to functions such as national defense only, immigration, weights and measures, patent office. Items that the federal government could perform but were impossible to be performed by the state or local governments. Anything which could conceivably be performed by the state or local governments or by the people, the federal government was prohibited from addressing, such as parenting, such as free market, such as welfare, such as energy policy, education, and so forth and so on. What distinguishes me from the other candidates is that is to limit the federal government back to its constitutional duties. And as quickly as politically possible, I would like to phase out all of the departments that are not authorized under the Constitution, such as the Department of Labor, Health and Human Services, Housing and Urban Development, Education, Energy, and so forth and so on.
Okay. So you say you would want to get rid of all those departments, and that's, like you said, based on the fact they're not in the Constitution to be authorized.
that's the primary reason, but the other reason is that the free market, through personal endeavor, just the private sector, or voluntary charity, can handle all those functions much better than the federal government. And if the people want some sort of state oversight, for example, for welfare or something like that, then the individual state government can handle it. And the genius of our nation is that we have 50 individual training grounds, proving grounds. And if one state has a certain welfare program which is bankrupting the state, but another state is able to perform the same service through, community support or voluntary charity or some sort of state subsidy, then the successful states can be emulated by the different states. But right now we have, one-size-fits-all government, which is forcing its dictates upon every single state, and it's destroying our nation.
Okay. Now, the one thing I've heard a lot of conservatives over the last few months, and really I guess years, talk about is abolishing the Department of Education. How do you think that would be a positive, and how do you think that would affect the future generations moving forward as far as education?
I'm very concerned about the education of our nation, and I would not want to diminish the capabilities of education in any manner whatsoever. But I do think that the Department of Education is one of the most destructive departments in the federal government. And the reason I say that is that most of the funding for education comes from the state level anyways, through property taxes or local sources of government. The federal government provides a relatively small amount of funding, but for that funding they're able to dictate curriculum. So what the federal government has done is they've de-emphasized patriotism, for one thing, history. So most of our graduating seniors or graduating students don't even understand the Constitution or the history of our nation. They teach instead diversity, they teach health, they teach subjects such as homosexuality as an alternative lifestyle.
Right.
And it's dumbing down our nation. So what I would like to do is I would like to phase out the Department of Education as quickly as politically possible, and I would like to return responsibility for educating the students to the parents. I would love to see something such as a voucher system so the parents could use free market principles to choose a school that best met their own needs.
Okay.
High-performing schools would excel. The low-performing schools would just naturally fade away.
Okay. Now, as far as the defense of our country, now, how do you feel about that, and what do you think what do we need to do? Where do you stand on the far as how we defend our country, and also working with our allies across the world, I guess?
The primary purpose of our federal government is to provide for the common defense. That's the only reason the colonies ratified the Constitution. I very strongly support a strong defense. I believe I understand Reagan where he said peace through strength. So I would like to have a strong military. I want to use them for defense only. So if anyone ever attacks us, I want to respond with overwhelming force and defeat our enemy. I don't want to use our military for nation building. I don't want to use our military for humanitarian purposes or anything like that. They should be a finely trained military force that can defeat our enemies. I'd like to have the strongest military in the world so that if anyone's thinking of doing us harm, they will know that they will be annihilated if they attack the United States.
But as far as the foreign policy goes, so you don't think that right now, do we have any obligations to protect Israel or anything like that?
I think we do have an obligation to protect Israel, but it's because we have a treaty with them, and Israel is a very strong ally. They are the first line of defense against evil in the Middle East, and they support us. And I think we should support them through treaties, and I don't think there's anything wrong having defense treaties with allies throughout the world. So I would strongly support Israel.
Okay. Now, I've been following the Michigan race a lot. And what do you think? I guess I don't want to put you on the spot here. What do you think of the way the party? You almost had this big time party support for Pete Hoekstra, and we have not. I don't know if it's been fully given everyone the opportunity to speak their message. What do you think about that?
I think that the party is definitely behind Pete Hoekstra. I feel it's a great mistake. I think Pete Hoekstra is a fine gentleman. I've met him several times. I'm not a friend, but I am an acquaintance. The problem with Pete is that he's been in Washington too long, and I don't think he understands the limited nature of government. He voted for cash for clunkers, which was a terrible mistake. It's not a function of government. He voted for TARP, which I think was a terrible mistake. He voted for the Wall Street and Auto Company bailouts, which I think was a bad mistake. And he said he would have voted for the debt ceiling increase just recently. And those are all major problems. We have to downsize government, not encourage it to get into aspects of society where it does not belong. And the federal government wastes money. It has no money of its own. It extracts money, by force through the tax code from the private sector, and it literally wastes it, or it builds dependency on government. And that is the problem. So Pete Hoekstra has not demonstrated a change in heart. He's part of the problem. When he entered government way back in the, I believe it was 1990s, the debt stood at $4 trillion. When he left, the debt stood at over $14 trillion. And of course, he wasn't the sole cause of the problem. But when I look back at his career, I don't remember him fighting against raising the debt or fighting against implementing new programs. People such as Rand Paul, that's what I think about. I know he's cutting government. I didn't look at Pete Hoekstra that way.
Okay. All right, and so that's part of, like you said, that's part of the culture of D.C. politics. What do you think you would do if elected when these kind of lobbyists and people because that's how it gets done. How do you stand up to that kind of pressure in D.C.?
First of all, I have no desire to become a established politician. I'm revolted by government as it stands right now, and I realize that we have to change the culture in Washington to limit it back to its constitutional duties. So I have no desire whatsoever to buy favor or anything like that.
Okay.
Because I would never, ever allow the GOP in Washington to hire my campaign staff. Whoever helped me get elected through my campaign manager and different volunteers throughout the state that totally support my concept of limited government, I would bring them with me. I would never want the GOP to hire my campaign staff.
Gotcha.
I don't see anything really wrong with lobbying necessarily, because one of our First Amendment rights is to petition government. So there's no problem. We have to have communications with government. But the problem is when the federal government gives sweetheart deals to supporters, it destroys the nation. That's why if the government only performed its constitutionally enumerated duties, which is defense primarily, immigration, the courts, federal court system, and things like that, and had nothing whatsoever to do with banking, insurance, healthcare, education, energy, etc., corruption would drop dramatically in Washington because there wouldn't be an incentive for crony capitalist organizations to try to gain favor with their representatives.
Now, also, where do you stand on family values and marriage? Obviously, you're someone that's constitutional, and it does not address that, obviously, right now in the Constitution. Where do you stand on traditional marriage, and what do you think government's role in that is?
I'm a very firm believer in traditional marriage, one man, one woman. I believe marriage is between one man, one woman, and their God, and it should be registered at the state level for legal purposes, for kids and passing on property and things like that. I do not want the government to get involved in marriage in any manner whatsoever, the federal government, excuse me. There's a marriage amendment that a lot of people are proposing, and it states basically that marriage is a union between one man and one woman. I would never want the government involved in that because they're prohibited right now by the 9th and 10th Amendments from addressing it. You'll have stupid things happen, like people go through and say, what does the word union mean? Was there separation of church and state, at the federal government, which I don't believe there is, but the federal government does.
Okay.
Union going to be secular, as an example. People say, what's a woman? You could have a man trapped in a woman's body. And if you have a psychiatrist saying that you are a man's body, but you're actually a woman inside there, is that going to constitute a woman? And is the federal government going to pay for a sex change operation? So I want the federal government to have nothing whatsoever to do with federal marriage. There's not a problem with marriage. Every single state that's voted on it basically has supported the concept of one man and one woman, but the federal courts have overturned some elections and some state legislatures have imposed it. So the problem is undoing the culture of promoting homosexuality throughout society and having the states vote out the legislatures that have, imposed this standard on them.
Okay. All right. What will be the first thing that you would do if you were elected to Senate? What would be the first thing you think you need to tackle as an issue in D.C.?
Well, I realize if I go to Washington, I will not be a favorite of the party because my loyalty is to the Constitution and it's not to party whatsoever. I would like to first tackle the spending. I realize we have to have a balanced budget, and I would like to balance the budget immediately, starting in the fiscal year October once I get elected. That's the first thing. The other thing is I'm extremely concerned about our national sovereignty. I don't like our open borders. There's something in the Constitution called Article 6, and Article 6 says that the Constitution and all treaties that the United States is authorized to engage in become the law of the land. And there's a lot of fear that our current government is negotiating with the United Nations to destroy our God-given rights. So what I would like to do is clarify Article 6, which it says that treaties are only the supreme law of the land if they're authorized by the United States. And to me, that means that the United States can only enter into treaties for which it has authorization, like defense and immigration, things like that. It's not authorized to enter into treaties negating our small arms rights, our Second Amendment rights, our parenting rights, abortion rights, and things like that. So I want to make sure that I would like to clarify, have a bill passed that says treaties are only valid if they conform to the provisions of Article 6, which say government cannot negotiate a treaty outside of its specific enumerated powers.
Okay. And if people want to know more about your campaign, how has it been campaigning? What have you experienced so far? You said you've never been a politician before. What's the experience been like so far on the campaign trail out and meeting people?
It's a lot of work. I enjoy it quite a bit. I go to like-minded venues right now because we're working on the primary, so I go to a lot of Tea Party groups. I go to a lot of GOP groups, parades, any place that will really take us who are interested in politics. When we started out, it was just myself and my wife. We just traveled around to different venues. Just about every place that we went, we secured volunteers. So now we have a volunteer network of about 60 or 70 dedicated volunteers throughout the state. And we have a very good campaign manager and different key people throughout the state that coordinate different districts. So it's going quite well. Okay.
And if people want to know more about your campaign, what's the website that they should go to?
www.peterkonechy, PeterKonetchy.com. That's all one word.
Okay. And, well, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the show. We're going to continue to follow you through the campaign season. Hopefully we'll have you back on to get updates. But give the people the website address one more time so they can go on there and do their own research and find out more about you.
Right. It's www.peterkonetchy, PeterKonetchy.com. I have one tab out there. It's called Positions, and I wanted to make sure that if people went out to my website, they'd understand all of my positions. So I have about 30 items where I talk about the Commerce Clause, Social Security, health care, and everything else. So they can go out there and read about my positions.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Peter, for coming on the show. I look forward to having you back on again, and good luck out on the campaign trail, sir.
Hey, thank you, Wayne. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day.
And that was Peter Konecchy. Like I said, he is the constitutional conservative of all the candidates. We're winding down here. All of them are good candidates. It just comes down to just the same way it is in the presidential race. Who do we think can beat the incumbent? Pete Hoekstra right now seems to have the most name recognition in ID. Clark Durant has an interesting platform. Gary Glenn, like I said, to me, appears to have the grassroots support. Peter Konecchy, he's working hard to, I would think, to rally all Tea Party support and a lot of the constitutional conservatives. He would fall into what I would consider the Ron Paul crowd, and Ron Paul has picked up a lot of steam. So people who are now starting to pay attention, a lot of attention to people who are strict constitutional conservatives. So we'll see what kind of traction he picks up during the race. Randy Heckman is our next guest. Now, Randy is a former prosecutor, and he was a former judge. He left the bench and founded the Michigan Family Forum. His whole platform is based on welfare reform. And on a personal note, this man has 12 kids, so I think that he's already proven that he knows how to delegate and deal with people. Anyone that has 12 kids has my respect. So it's going to be his platform seems to be a lot based on welfare reform. We'll see if that message resonates, but he has a very strong platform, and I'm going to go ahead and play the interview with Randy Heckman. This is Randy Hegman right here.
Hi, this is Wayne Bradley, and I'm here at the Mackinac Conference, and I'm talking to my first guest of the weekend, U.S. Senate candidate Randy Hegman. Randy, how are you enjoying this conference so far?
It's really been fun, Wayne, to be here. There are literally 1,000+ Republicans who are concerned, as I am, about our country and the direction it's going. And it's exciting that we care that much and that we're motivated to make changes that must be made to keep America going in the future.
Okay. All right, now, to differentiate yourself from the rest of the candidates here at the Senate, what do you believe your platform is that makes you stand out from these other candidates?
Well, Wayne, we're all of the opinion that this debt and the fiscal crisis that we have in America is truly, we're within a handful of years before America goes off the cliff. But where I think we may disagree is exactly what it is that we need to do to cut the deficit. And I feel very, very strongly that the area that we have hurt ourselves the most, frankly, is in the area of welfare.
Okay.
All the wars that we fought as a nation from the beginning, from the Revolutionary War, have cost taxpayers $6.4 trillion. The war on poverty, which was started in 1964 by the Democrats to create the great utopian society, has cost us in excess of $16 trillion. And what is our national debt today? It's pushing $16 trillion. America does not work when we guarantee food, clothing, shelter, and medical care for every one of our residents and citizens. Government is there to create the environment in which people create wealth, the environment in which people create music and art and other forms of things, but it's really to the nonprofits, the churches, extended families, and so on to meet the needs of the poor, which is, we get a blessing to do. I do not get the same blessing paying my income taxes.
Makes sense. What about, right now, I've kind of noticed that the Michigan Republican Party is kind of almost playing favorites right now. Does that frustrate you at all on what's going on?
Well, officially, the party itself, and I've talked to Bobby Shostak, who I respect greatly, a number of times, and they are remaining neutral. But there are some leaders, for example, the governor and so on, because of his friendship with Pete Hoekstra, have endorsed him. And, I had a good talk with the governor, and I said, we judges, I'm a former judge, we try to hear both sides before we make a decision, and he kind of chuckled with me a little bit. But it was a friendship thing he did, and I respect that. But what we really need, is someone that's going to go to Washington and not just take their seat in Washington again. We need someone that's going to go and knock heads together. We need change. And that's, my background, frankly, is about making things happen and fixing things. I ran for judge at age 27 against a well-known incumbent. I was a nobody from nowhere with no money, but I was campaigning on an issue of changing juvenile court, and I got 55% of the vote. And it's much bigger magnitude here, but it's a similar sort of a thing. Being a senator means very little to me, except that it's a leverage point to change America before it's too late.
Now, we were talking about the debt that the welfare system has brought on. What do you think we can do to change that and to obviously get America back in better financial footing?
All right, again, for decades, we met the needs of the poor and helped the poor move from dependence to independence. Through, again, charity, through nonprofits, through neighbors, just meeting needs. That's what we do as Americans. But now we say, no, that's government's job. The government is good at writing checks. And, of course, every check they write, 42 cents of every dollar is borrowed. Government is not good at using tough love. Government's not good at mentoring people and helping them to grow. It's like we're saying to those in the inner city, those who are poor, we're saying, you know what, the best you can hope for is to get handouts the rest of your life. That is demeaning. That is wrong. The welfare system has hurt families. The welfare system makes people perpetually dependent on it. And that is evil. That's wrong. Okay. So it's not just that it's cost us lots of money. It's cost lives. It's cost families. It's caused the breakup of families, the disintegration of that unit. that is the strength of every person, which is the family unit itself.
Right.
So it's got to be changed. We've got it. So actually, what I would do would be the first year we ought to reduce all welfare across the board 10%. It's kind of a leading shot to tell the nonprofits in our communities we're serious about this. The next year it ought to go down 30%. And eventually it should be eliminated. I'm just saying that this is a part that is not consistent with our system of government.
Okay.
It sounds like it's good, but it has many unintended consequences that have been deleterious to our country.
All right. Now, are there any other issues that really catch your attention that need fixing as U.S. Senator?
Sure. Well, certainly, we got to get businesses going again. The taxation system is a joke. I mean, it's a cruel joke. I mean, it's unfair. It's uneven. It's got to be smoothed out, simplified, reduced, and broadened. More people have to have skin in the game. The regulatory system in America is choking business. The EPA should be eliminated, along with in my opinion, the Department of Education is just not needed. Department of Energy is not needed. Again, these are just things, but again, the real house that's on fire is the debt. That's got to be dealt with first, but these are some means of reaching that end as well.
Are there any of the military situations that we're in that you think that we are wasting money on or could alleviate some of the financial burden on?
Well, again, that's lower down in the spectrum of expense, honestly. Mm-hmm. However, the last thing we need to do is to be nation building. When we're going to engage in a war, we got to do it. There's no easy, bloodless way of engaging in a war. Once we decide to go, we got to go in with both feet, get the job done, and then get out of there. That's basic. But we do need a strong defense in our nation. That's one thing our federal government must do. And a lot of our equipment is becoming antiquated, our jets and ships and so on. And we're going to need to invest more money in that. That's an important role of the federal government.
Okay. What about some of these current ideas that the president has about spending a lot of money on infrastructure projects? How necessary is that right now?
The word comes to mind, shovel ready. And when people just roll their eyes. To me, this is just a campaign ploy on his part. I'm sorry. I have lost a lot of respect. I still pray for my president. I still respect the office, but I've lost respect for him as a leader. And again, to me, that's not a serious recommendation on his part at all.
Okay. If people are looking to find out more about your campaign, what's the website and where can they go to find out more information about you?
Wayne, the website is randyheckman2012.com. And Heckman is Heckman. There's no C in Heckman. randyheckman2012.com.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the show today, and I hope to have you come back on during the the campaign season. Thank you.
Wayne, thanks for the opportunity.
All right.
You're a good man.
Well, that was Randy Heckman, and like I said, I've talked to all the candidates, and all I can say is that we have some really, really good candidates. Like I said, reading my chat boards here, David seems to feel like if we're going to choose someone that's going to uphold the Constitution and preserve our personal liberties, Gary Glenn or Peter Kenichi seems to be the best candidates. If we're basing it off name recognition and the ability to win in the major polls right now, I'm still thinking that it'll come down to the big three, which what I would say are Pete Hoekstra, Clark Durant, Gary Glenn. Gary Glenn to me seems to has the most support from the grassroots level and the Tea Party people. So it's going to be very interesting. Give me a call if you were listening in and let me know who you think might be the best candidate. Got about 15 minutes left here on the show. The call-in number is 347-996-3175. Again, that call-in number is 347-996-3175. Give me a call. Been off the air for a little while. Been getting some things in order. Just because I've been off the air, I've still been active. I've actually been doing some local TV shows. I've done Let It Rip a few times. I was just last week on the air with Charlie Langton. So I've just been also had the birth of my son on Halloween. So I finally got my boy here. I'm excited about that. So I'm feeling really blessed. Hopefully that we're going to continue to do this show. I'm looking at some AM options hopefully in the new year to really step up the presence of the show and do some things that we, like I said, bring it to the next level. If you have any, questions or any suggestions, I'm always open to those too, how we can make the show better. give me a call, 347-996-3175. Later this week, we're going to have Rick Ector on the show. We're going to be talking gun rights, gun safety. Also, we're going to be talking, it's the holiday times and, how you can protect yourself and be a little more careful. We're going to have Rick on the show, and he'll give us some tips. It's always fun having Rick on the show, so I think he's going to be on Thursday morning, and I'll keep you updated on that. Always go to the website, conservativeiscool.com, to keep up on what's going on as far as the show and new updates and new news and postings. I've been making a lot more video logs lately. I just did one on Ron Paul, and I'm going to do one today, I believe, on John Huntsman, because I believe that from where we stand here as a country, we're going to have to start looking at all the candidates. I'd love to talk a little. We're going to have a Friday show about the presidential election. We'll probably do that after the debate on Thursday. We'll talk about that on Friday morning. So, like I said, we're gonna rev back up here, really start getting back on the air, giving people what they want to hear as far as the quality guests, and letting the people get their voices heard too. Because I think too much we let the politicians and also the mainstream media dictate who our best candidates are, and I think it's good to get the candidates on here, and it's also good to have the people actually talk about what they want from their candidates. So feel free to give me a call. The lines are always open, 347-996-3175. Now, again, so people understand, Debbie Stabenow already has about $4 million in the bank in her war chest for this campaign, so that's a lot of money. That's why it's going to be important for whoever the candidate is to have the ability to raise money, because as much as we don't want to believe how important it is, for money and the dollars it takes to run a successful campaign, Debbie Stabenow is a well-established D.C. veteran, and she's liked by a lot of people. She's really not what I would consider one of those mean, nasty politicians. So she has the money, she has the war chest, and I guarantee she's going to use it. She's going to have to use it against whoever our candidate is, because they're going to be strong. It's just a matter of getting the right one and letting the people choose, and not really letting what I would consider the mainstream media or even the Republican establishment itself picking the candidates. This is going to be something the people do. So it's going to be very interesting. From all the candidates I talk to and all the events that I go to, I get the impression that so far Pete Hoekstra has been ordained, and I like Pete Hoekstra. I supported him for the governor's race, but right now, again, I'm kind of waiting to see, really hear the messages clearly and make sure that everyone's on the same page. I like the candidates, all of them. It's just going to come down to who do we think can beat Debbie Stabenow, and they have a few more months to convince people who the best candidate's going to be. So give me a call. Let me know who you like, 347-996-3175. Dave said he wishes he could call in, but he's in the office. He says he works for a very liberal, biased publisher. I understand, David. Sometimes we're going to start maybe we'll do some of these shows in the evening so people can call in. Like I said, kind of judging right now, we're trying to see what's the best times. So if you have any suggestions, my listeners out there, feel free to drop me a line. Let me know what works best for you. That's already letting me know that in the evenings it would be better for some people because they can actually call in. So I do appreciate you listening in, David. And I like I said, I know who your candidates are, why you like them. I appreciate you listening on the show. Appreciate you participating on Facebook. So we got about 10 minutes left here. We're gonna talk a little bit more later in the week about the presidential race. I think it's very interesting at this point how Newt appears to be getting right now his 2 weeks of being at the top of the heat, but the difference between Newt and Michelle Bachmann and Herman Cain and the rest of the candidates, and Rick Perry also had their maybe what I would consider their 2 weeks of being the anti-Mitt Romney candidate, is that Newt Gingrich has he has the moxie. He knows exactly how to debate. He will put together an organization. I've spoken with Rick Tyler, who was on his campaign. I think a lot of those people are going to jump back on it. They might have recognized at the time they weren't giving Newt the credit, or they didn't believe in him enough at that time, and I think he's proven a lot of people wrong. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out, because a lot of people jumped ship on Newt when he was running initially at the beginning of his campaign. I think he had more confidence in himself than obviously a lot of other people had in him. So it'll be interesting. It's going to be very interesting. We're going to talk a lot about that on Friday. I want people to really listen in on Friday because I think that's something we all need to talk about is who's the right candidate to challenge President Obama. I'll be quite honest right now. I'm not sure that Newt Gingrich is going to be able to do that, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. We've got a lot of time between now. We don't. The Iowa caucus is in about 3 or 4 weeks, so that's when the process is going to start. Newt is heavily favored in those 3 states, in Iowa, South Carolina, and Florida right now. So I think a lot of conservatives, they know Newt's baggage, but they're comfortable with him because of his background. He's not what some people would consider a flip-flopper, but he's also got some questionable views on things, and I don't know how that's going to play in a major election. But we're going to talk a lot about that on Friday. So give me a call if you're listening in, 347-996-3175. Got a few minutes left on the show today. Said Michigan, we got a lot of things going on this week in Michigan. I'm going to have Tom McMillan on the show real soon to talk about this the education debate, and I'm also going to be having Brandon Jessup on to talk a little bit more about the emergency financial manager. So it's going to be interesting. We got a lot of good things going on the show coming up. Got a lot of great guests, and like I said, things are changing here in Michigan, and we got to follow it to the end here. Rick Snyder's still pushing heavy for some of his agenda as far as the bridge program, and it's been put on hold for a couple weeks here, but I'm going to get a couple people to come in and talk about that too, because I think people really need to understand in the situation we're in. We're spending money we don't have, and not surprisingly, we have the governor who is somewhat pushing some of that agenda. He did not fight the Obamacare mandate, so we got a lot of things we can talk about here in Michigan, and I'm really looking forward to that. Something else I'm going to be talking about. I'm not going to give everything away right now. I got a lot of good things coming up. We got some really hot topics coming up that might surprise people, but we're going to have some fun over the next couple weeks here going into the new year. So give me a call, 347-996-3175. That's the call-in number. Give me a call. I'm taking calls here for the last 5 minutes of the show. I want to thank everyone who's been listening in, and we're going to ramp it up here going into the end of the year. I'm really excited about it, and there's some great things that are going to be happening. Give me a call, 347-996-3175. Thursday, I believe at 10:30, you'll probably catch me on Brandon Jessup's show. I'm looking forward to that. We have a good time every week debating the issues. I'm going to start posting links to that show as well because it's fun actually debating someone. Me and him are good friends, but we don't see eye to eye on a lot of issues, so that's always fun. Give me a call, 347-996-3175. Thanks, Rachel, for listening in. I really appreciate you listening to the show today. We'll be doing this more often. Like I say, you'll definitely want to be listening in for Rick Ector's show talking about gun safety here in the Detroit area and some safety tips for the holidays. So that's going to be a very good show. I want all my ladies that are listening in, I want you guys definitely want you to listen to that show. It's very important to stay safe during the holiday season. So I definitely want you to listen in on that. All right. All right, well, people, I'll tell you what, we're going to be signing off the air here real soon. I want to thank everyone that was listening in, everyone that participated on the chat room board. I had a good time talking back and forth with a few people. Always feel free to, like I said, share your opinions. If you don't want to call in, some people are shy about calling in. Share your opinions on the chat board. There's plenty of space on there to, if you don't want to call in, and also let your opinion be known. So thanks a lot. Give me a call, 347-996-3175. All right, well, I think we're signing off the air here. I want to thank everyone that listened in. Thursday morning, we're going to have Rick Ector on the show. I hope to have Gus Portello on the show also from the Young Republicans. We're going to talk about who he's looking at as a candidate and the things that they're looking for from the presidential candidate for the GOP and also probably from the Michigan Senate race as well. Gus is a good guy, and I'm looking forward to hearing his opinion. So keep listening in to the Wayne Bradley Show. The call-in number is 347-996-3175. I want to thank everybody for listening this morning. Have a good day, and God bless you. Bye-bye.